I'm going to say something short of regular.
Go on, thank you. Is it under there? Not at all. No, ma'am.
Oh, yeah, we got a perfect long Wi-Fi code. I gotta go get it.
Sorry. So. Is it blue back there?
Oh, yeah, I gotta go get a Wi-Fi code.
Like I feel it. With my no, that's the second one. It's not blue. No, mine is up there, but mine one. Oh, it's me. Well, it's got. Real it is back there. It got way back. This is. No, where was she? Right there? Yeah. And totally she just started and she took on the bottom to get her steps out of storage to go up there until Monday. He wasn't kidding.
We try Wi-Fi routers like nobody's business. And so, because it gets so hot over where it is, and so Phil got us a business rated mega router that handles it a lot better. Just extra security. So you don't get to put a nice little cutie little password that everybody.
So she had to call a friend of hers to come by. Picking up keys and be there. But it worked out.
Oh,
Yeah. 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 But it is important to have somewhere that. Yeah.
Is Amy still in town? Does she have to go back?
Amy?
Yeah.
She's in Los Angeles, which is where she now lives.
Right.
Pretty sure we use that.
No more Middle East.
Life in the big city.
Yeah, life in the big city. Feels like I'm yelling at you, doesn't it?
No.
No? No? Yeah? Okay.
Good job.
Yo.
Yellow away.
You found it.
Cosme. Always gotta let Cosme walk that out.
Hey, Cosme.
How are you doing, young man? Pretty good. Good.
Oh, me too. You want one? Okay, no problem.
It might be, so yeah. Do you mind? Thank you. Cool. I'm running out of sheets. That's awesome. It's okay. You don't have to share. It's okay. It's no big deal. At least you aren't like some Americans that have in classes. They can get their own. I don't have to share with nobody.
I don't share it at all.
Excuse me as I hide my amazement. next week when we will be talking about sharing. Thank you. So how to get out the Wi-Fi code? Anybody need it?
Man, we're good.
Okay. Did it work?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. That's good. Hey, Ricardo. I didn't see you sneak in. As we get started today, Gus, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
Okay. And I just want to ask that you be with Jeff here this evening as he gives the word. I want to ask that you watch over our friends and family, our loved ones on vacation. I want to ask that you just watch over us and bless them, and if it be your will. And all this we ask in your Son, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
It's interesting. See, y'all don't know our visitor back there, do you? Y'all don't know each other, do you? You all from Lubbock, so that's, Do what?
Good place to be from.
I guess so. Oh no, is it cooler up there
I
right
came
now?
down here to get some cool air.
That's what I figured.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm looking forward to winter. Yeah, the humidity down here.
Yes. Yeah. There's something to say that people can, make fun of people who live in a desert or dustier areas. You know what? That no or very low humidity speaks volumes. It's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
She actually means something.
I know, right? I mean, yeah. We lived in New Mexico. For, is it too loud? I feel like I'm screaming at you. No. No. That's
I'm gonna yell all you want. I'm cool.
Well, you're cool anyway, Will. I can't keep up with you. I want to grow my hair and do what you did. Okay.
It's good to be able to join them.
Amen. Tonight we're moving. Last week we did the parable of the persistent widow. Tonight we're doing the parable right below that. This entire summer we've been looking at the parables of Jesus, taking one or two a week, depending on what the theme was and if they were connected or not. And so tonight we're doing the parable of the Pharisee and tax collector. Technically, like last week, there's no preliminaries. There's no situation, and nobody asks a question. Jesus isn't at somebody's house and someone says something for Jesus to launch into a parable. It's just one day Jesus decides to unleash this parable, and we just kind of work with it the best we can. The point of the parable, though, is found in the extremes between righteousness and hypocrisy. Jesus is going to whack some nerves today over how people viewed certain segments of society. I want to challenge you in a way. If you're very familiar with this parable, because this parable is one of the more familiar ones. If you're familiar with this parable, I'm going to ask you for the benefit of tonight to look at this in a way in which you have never heard it or seen it before. Really try to put your mind back into this is the first time. Also, try to put yourself back into a Jewish mindset where you were raised to believe that the Pharisees had it all together. That they were the religious elite, that they were special, that they were the most disciplined, that they were the most holy. And that if God was to side between two people and one of them was a Pharisee, he would always go with the Pharisee. We have to try to put ourselves there for this parable to really hit home. Because this is where the big points are made. But you do a lot of reading in the Bible, especially in the Gospels, and I love teaching from the Gospels. You have to do a lot of work with the Pharisees. And sometimes you just have to ask ourselves, my goodness sakes, why is it that the Pharisees are so cranky? Why is it that they're so cranky? What is their problem? Yeah, but before that, how did they get there though? I know that's what it progressed to. Yeah, but how did it start? What's their big issue? The Pharisees were a party, and the word Pharisee comes from a Hebrew or Aramaic word that means separate. They're the separatists. It's a party that emerged largely out of a group of scribes and sages. It may refer to their separation from Gentiles, sources of ritual impurity, or from irreligious Jews. So they were a bunch of people who saw elements creeping into Judaism. And they didn't like it. And so they made great oaths and they put strict rules upon themselves in order to keep themselves separate from some of the bad stuff that was coming in. What was coming in was Hellenism. When the Greeks came in, they brought a Hellenistic mindset. We got to turn all the world Greek. And so with the Greeks came Greek religion, Greek gods, Greek goddesses, and all that jazz. And they didn't like what was happening with that. So again, it's the idea of we need to keep separate from that. The world was coming into Judea, but Jews combated the trend by dedicating themselves to the holiness of God and shunning Hellenistic paganism. It wasn't a horrible idea in the beginning. In fact, you go back to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, verse 20, Jesus tells his audience that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. You know, that's one of those lines that's a little bit of a puzzler, because you're like, wait a minute, you want us to be more than these people, more than these guys? It's not about the righteousness they had. It was about the word is left. It's about the expectations they put upon themselves. Is what they were seeking after. Even in the days of Jesus, where they got a lot of things wrong, they were still trying to watch themselves in regards to righteousness with God. There's just a few things went sideways. But the original idea wasn't bad. The problem came that it slowly evolved into a program of egotism and self-righteousness, and that's when it went off the trails. It went off the tracks very, very quickly with that mindset. I mean, you look at their behavior, and look at how they're described. I mean, hold your place in Mark 17, or I don't know, I don't do the phone's too little for me to do the Bible on, so I don't know if you can mark it or whatnot. Open a new window, or what have you, and look at Matthew 23. And we're going to look at some instances of how they're described and what the problem is. There wasn't a problem with them being a Pharisee. That wasn't it. There were good Pharisees. Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea. In fact, John tells us that there were other Pharisees who did believe that Jesus was the Christ. The problem was that they were just scared of the other people. So just because you're a Pharisee did not mean that you're a hypocrite. You know what? Probably they were a minority. But another probably is that they were the vocal minority. They're the ones that always like to open their mouths biggest. It's like what Jeff Foxworthy used to say about Southern people. Southerners are just as smart as everybody else on the planet. The problem is, he just can't keep the most ignorant amongst us off the television set. Same thing with the Pharisees. I bet most of them were all right. You just couldn't keep the hypocrites quiet and not so showy. But you look at what Jesus says about them, Matthew 23, verse 5. Everything they do is done for men to see. They make their phylacteries wide. Okay, the phylacteries is the box. If you can imagine a box just sitting on like a headband that they would tie around their head. It's said in the law to keep the law on your head and on your hand. They took this literally. And so they would take chunks of the law and put it in boxes and tie it around their head. And obviously, even though, paper is paper, right? Well, if my box is bigger than your box, then I'm more holy than you. I don't make up the facts, I just report it. Same thing with the tassels. They were told to put tassels on all their clothes because the law of Moses says so. It was one of the ways in which the Jews were supposed to mark themselves as being dedicated towards God. But God was silent on the length. Well, obviously, if my tassels are longer than your tassels, I am more holy than thou art. Verse 6, they love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted in the marketplace and to have men call them rabbi. Okay, What is Jesus saying that is wrong with the Pharisees in that section? He spends the whole sermon talking about it, but you just get a lot of details in that one paragraph. What's he saying?
And then being elevated by the men around them.
Yes. Anybody else want to add to that?
It's all about me.
It's all about me.
They've already received their reward.
Yeah, to put in a Sermon on the Mount idea, they already received their reward. Why? It's praise. Well, obviously, I preach for everybody. If I dedicated myself to just being able to wow you so that I can get a good job, attaboy, slap on the back, way to do it, and that was my primary focus, I missed the whole point. There was nothing wrong with being a rabbi. Their problem was that they loved being called rabbi because of who they were. That's the problem. My personal belief is that if I'm ever given a title, it's a title given to me by the people, what they consider me to be, not one that I take on myself. It means more. These people, they love to do it for the sake of having it. Flip over to Mark 7. Mark 7, verses 6 and 7. Jesus is replying to them. This is Mark's account of them talking and discussing clean and unclean. And he says, he replied, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites, as it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men. All right, what's he saying about them? What's their shortcoming? It's not in the heart. It means nothing. Imagine, just sit back and imagine. The Pharisees, like the Sadducees, was a Jewish sect. And it was a sect that you had to join. Paul's going to tell us here in a minute his experience of being a Pharisee. It was something that most of them took very seriously, Paul included. He took it very seriously. But then there was other people who didn't take it seriously at all. And it was just about the show of it. They didn't allow what they spent their entire lives dedicating themselves to study and trying to be better at. They never let it touch the heart. You flip over to Philippians chapter 3. Paul talks about his experience being a Pharisee very briefly. Philippians chapter 3 in verse 2. He tells them this. He tells them what it was like for him, but he puts it in an attitude of watch out for these people. He says, chapter 3, verse 2 of Philippians, he says, watch out for those dogs, those men who do evil, those mutilators of the flesh, for it is we who are the circumcised, we who worship by the Spirit of God, who glory in Christ Jesus, and who put no confidence in the flesh, though I myself have reason for such confidence. If anyone else thinks he has reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law of Pharisee. As for zeal, persecuting the church, as for legalistic righteousness, flawless. Interesting term, legalistic righteousness. It's almost like a contradiction of terms. But what is legalistic righteousness? Oh, we know.
You follow the law, but because it's the law, that there's no heart in it.
Law? Law? Law alone? Come on now, who are my Fiddler on the Roof fans? Tradition. 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 Yeah, I mean, that's what it was about. You got to follow the tradition. You keep all that right, you're legalistically righteous. Does that sound happy? Does that sound joyful? Does that sound like freedom that God was wanting people to have? But it wasn't just that they behaved this way. This was their mindset. They also, if you read the Gospels, do you ever notice their ambush quality? It's like wherever Jesus turned, there was some Pharisee coming out of the woodwork, asking him some question or keeping an eye out on him, seeing what kind of trouble he could get into. You know, I put down a couple of examples. You know, if you flip over to John 9, I've talked about John 9 before. John 9 is the account of Jesus healing the blind man being hauled in front of the Sanhedrin, being casted out of the synagogue, and then Jesus finds him later, and they talk about spiritual blindness. But you jump to the very end of this chapter, Jesus is talking to this guy. Jesus and this guy is having a conversation. Jesus and this guy is talking about what true spiritual blindness is and what being able to see. Jesus and this guy is having an A and B conversation between Jesus and this guy. Talking to him. Not bothering anyone. And all of a sudden, verse 40, some Pharisees who were there with him heard him say this and asked, "What, are we blind too? I wasn't even talking to you." And Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." If you can just picture this, it's like Jesus and this guy talking. And all of a sudden, the Pharisee, who just happened to be a few feet away, heard them and said, wait a minute. I got something to say. And that's how it was for Jesus. Read the Gospels and see it. That's how it was. That they would just interject themselves because they felt they had the right to. Remember, they were viewed as rabbis. Rabbis had the freedom to speak, but it's like, goodness, where's your mothers? Learn some manners. But that's how it was. You flip back to Matthew 12. Matthew 12:2. Jesus and his disciples are just walking along the path, going along their way. They're hungry, so they stop and they pluck a head of grain, rub it between their hands, blow the chaff from their hands, and eat the kernel. You're cooking on the Sabbath, that's illegal. Goodness sakes, if you ever eaten a sunflower seed, would you consider that cooking? But that's how it was. Verse 2, when the Pharisees saw this, they said, look, your disciples are doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath. Goodness sakes, where did you come from? That's always been my question. Where do these guys pop up and see this? They're just hiding in wait for Jesus to show up. You jump over to verses 9 and 10. It says, going from that place, he went into their synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there, looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. They asked, well, wait a minute, what are they doing? They're just watching and just now looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. Do they care? How many Christians in here wish that you could spend like an hour talking to Jesus? Right? These people got it for 3 years, and how they spend their time waiting for a way to accuse Jesus. That's what they spent their time doing. And then onward down in verse 14, but the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. All right, that's when it starts in Matthew, for chapter 12. There's 28 chapters in Matthew. Back in chapter 12, they start finding a way to try to kill Jesus. And all the Gospels have this moment in which the Pharisees say, okay, fine, we can't shut him up, let's just kill him. Because we all know, I'm going to kill you, come to church. That works. But that's...
Well, that was a quick slide, wasn't it?
Yeah.
From irritating him to wanting to kill him.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
Why did this happen? We see it today. We see it today. If the world can't reason with us to be quiet, what will the world try to do with us? Get them out of there. Some way, somehow, they either try to get you in trouble, they'll try to take your business, they'll try to take you to court, or some other things. And it still happens. It's still the same mentality. They couldn't shut Jesus up. They couldn't outthink Jesus. We got to get him out of the way for the good of the Jewish nation. Well, because Jesus was making them look bad. But this parable is one of the more familiar parables. To feel the punch, we must pretend we're hearing it for the first time. Pretend that you believe the Pharisees were blessed by God just for the sake that they're Pharisees and tax collectors are beneath God's notice. Put yourself back there. The tax collectors, on contrariwise, were hated. They were seen as Roman sellouts. Allow ourselves to be shocked again by the fact that the Gospel of Matthew is written by a tax collector. One of the 12 disciples was a tax collector. And remember, that party after Jesus called Matthew is filled up with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes. Why? Because all they had was each other. That was their social circle. So, that's how they were viewed. So, put yourself back there and remember. And look at it with fresh eyes, maybe for the first time in a long time. But the purpose, what's the purpose of all this going to be? How do we view ourselves through the eyes of God? We're about to get a look at how foolish we look when we try to strut before the Almighty with how good we are. It doesn't work very well. So let's get into this thing. Matthew chapter 18, verse 9, it says, "To some who are confident of their own righteousness and look down on everybody else." Well, there's this parable in a nutshell right there. For this is going out, this one's dedicated to the self-righteous who look down their noses at everybody else. Have you ever been looked down? Has ever been looked down your nose by someone else? Have you ever been discounted just because of who you are? This parable is going out to you. Straight from the Almighty. Here we go. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood up and prayed about himself. "God, I thank you that I am not like other men, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get." But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." It's very straightforward what's happening. It's basic. 2 men are going to the temple to pray. One is a Pharisee and the other is a tax collector. Basic Jew would immediately side with the Pharisee in this situation, by the way. No question asked. In fact, what they might ask is, what in the world is a tax collector doing? The difference between the two, though, is the way they pray. And the difference between the two prayers is to focus. Okay, now you tell me. Tell me about the Pharisee's prayer.
Somehow when he discussed himself, I get the feeling it was kind of loud. Because the sinner could hear what he was saying.
Yes, well, how can we know that we're being prayed against unless we can hear it? Well, that was sarcastic, though. True. Yeah.
And I gather that because in mine it said standing by himself, to me that looked like he went up in front, got on the platform and stood there and then started off with this brag fest.
I didn't get a chance, if you look at the Facebook page, sometimes I put a picture, some sort of picture depicting the parable. I wasn't able to do that this time, but I've seen artwork about this parable. And yeah, the Pharisee's like out in the open, the tax collector is like in shadow of a pillar, trying everything he can to just be invisible so that nobody will mess with him. What else about this Pharisee's prayer?
Doesn't think he needs any type of forgiveness. He's great. He's awesome.
If I was God, I'd want to save me too. If I needed it. But yeah, exactly. If I needed it. Anybody else? Yes, Will.
Can't take Mr. Big Shot.
Yes, because he thinks he's Mr. Big Shot. And in some circles, he is Mr. Big Shot. The Pharisee, he prays about himself. Remember that. It's all about him. Thank you, Lord, for making me me. I just can't stand it. Some historians believe that there was a Jewish prayer that was found that actually went something along the lines like this. God, I thank you for not making me a Gentile, a slave, or a woman. In other words, when Jesus said this parable, I have no problem believing that it rang true with the people who were hearing it. They're like, yeah, I hear it. Yeah. He prays about who he is. I thank you that I am not like other men. What he is, he prays that he's thankful that he's not like robbers, evildoers, or adulterers, or even like this tax collector, which is just, I don't know, that just bugs me. That's just rude.
Well, he doesn't even have a rudimentary understanding that sin is sin. There is no degree
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Excuse me.
You got
God
the
does,
word.
God does have a skewed version of sin. Obviously, this guy has a bigger phylactery and tassel. You need to put that in your calculation. Obviously, that makes him better.
Yeah.
But it's also about what he does. He fasts twice a week, and he gives a tenth of all he gets. Now, the Pharisees, they were good at their fasting. Again, the problem was, you look at the Sermon on the Mount, the problem sometimes was motive. But they would tithe everything, even down to their herbs and spices. Everything. I mean, you might say they were above reproach from the action, but the attitude was the problem. Same thing with fasting. Something else that Jesus talked about in the Sermon on the Mount. How yes, they would fast twice a week. But they would make sure to put on their shabby wear, not comb their hair, not straighten their beard, and look really pitiful so people know that they went today without lunch. It was just, it was all for show. It was also that they could be seen. And he's thankful to God that God made him this way. All right, tell me about the tax collector.
He's not protecting himself. He's just there sitting down like, okay, yeah.
That's right. How valuable is it to be able to be honest with ourselves? Psychologist offices across the country are filled with people who cannot be honest with themselves. It's a very important trait. Anything else about this guy? Oh, we got honesty, we got humility.
He exalted God, he recognized how high God was, and how low he was.
Oh, didn't the Pharisee do that? Obviously, an awesome God had to create a specimen like me. But no, he didn't. This guy did. If you notice, the Pharisee spoke for 3 verses. The tax collector got all of his done in the back third of 1. But his was more powerful. See, this stuff, Jesus wraps it up. Again, this tax collector, first of all, he stands at a distance. Now, does he stand at a distance because he's a tax collector and doesn't want to be seen, or does he stand at a distance because he doesn't want to approach? Well, you might consider, the more close you get towards the center of the temple, that's approaching most holy places. So does he not just feel worthy? Actually, honestly, whichever, it still shows spiritual humility. He won't even look towards heaven. I remember when I was in New Mexico, I accidentally offended a person there that I respected, and I went and apologized. Not that, he stood this tall to me, but I couldn't even look him in the eyes. I mean, it was just one of those. And he actually had to say, "Look at me." This guy couldn't even look towards heaven. It's not like if we looked up, we would see God's face, but still, he did not feel worthy to look. He beats himself. This isn't some sort of, Catholic flogging or anything like that. I need to beat myself because I sinned. This isn't a passion. I am a sinner. Sometimes I don't know if it's like this with ladies, but sometimes guys got to hit something when we feel great amounts of emotion coursing through us. That's what this is. You know what? He wasn't over there whispering and saying, "I'm a sinner." He's feeling, "I am a sinner," and he prays for forgiveness. Jesus then says the line, verse 14. That, again, we have to picture this. When Jesus says this, everybody's jaws drop. Really. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. What? Yeah, that's the way it worked. What does being justified before God mean? What is that? It's Bible phrase. What does that mean? We don't speak like that. But what does that mean? What's the tax collector hoping to get? Mercy. Also wrapped up with a nice little word that begins with the letter G. Thank you. Yes, he's looking for mercy. He's looking for grace. Being justified before God. How does God justify everybody? Showing over mercy and grace, forgiveness. Now, in this case, it's about receiving God's grace. So the question is, who received God's grace on this day? It's the tax collector. Why was it the tax collector?
He realized he was a sinner.
And what did he do?
He admitted it.
He admitted it, and what else did he do? Submitted himself, and he asked for it. Yeah. He admitted it. He recognized the defilements within himself, and lo and behold, he asked for it. One of the reasons why this parable is so shocking is that it shatters the illusion of self-righteousness before God. Shatters it. Completely shatters it. This is how come the Pharisee didn't get justification that day. If you look at the Pharisee's prayers, it was already said, he didn't even ask for it. He didn't ask for anything. He just telling God how awesome he is. But he didn't ask for anything. He recognized no shortcoming. You look at those examples of Pharisaic behavior that we see in the New Testament that we looked at earlier. By the way, you can see examples of this in churches and in Christians' lives today. It's the same type of attitude. I am so good. I might need a little bit of grace, but I've done most of the work. I've done like 90% of the work myself. I need like 10% grace. You know what? Give me 50%. Do me like a tip at a restaurant. Give me 15% and I'm good. The tax collector is humble. He is not perfect, and he knows it. Now we go along and we say, well, I'm not perfect. Do we really understand what that means, though? Do we know that? And this isn't about us getting down in the dumps and realizing that we're failures in order to bring us down, because that's not good either. It's not good to wallow in shame. You know, the Apostle Paul was able to admit that he's the chief among sinners, but still he was able to be very successful in his life. He recognizes his past sin. He recognizes his past mistakes, but he does not allow the ghost of past mistakes cripple him from being ineffective in the time that he lived. So it's not about getting down in the dumps over guilt over what we are, but do we realize that we sin? And do we realize that we need forgiveness? And I stand here before you admitting I need grace. I'm not even going to say as much as anybody else that doesn't matter. I need it. That's it. That's the truth of it. Peter, there was a reason why he wrote in his letters that you got to remember. You got to remember the grace that we have received. We have to remember the forgiveness that we have received. Because if we don't, then we could forget. And then we become the Pharisee. It's one of the punchlines of the parable of the lost son, but it's the truth of it. If we are in danger of becoming the older brother at the end of that parable who doesn't want to welcome the younger brother home. We're in danger of becoming that. If we forget, we were once the younger son coming home. And we can't forget that. We have to remember where we came from, because this will empower us to carry out the message. This will empower us to evangelism. This will empower us to wanting to share the gospel with our friends. It will empower us to be more forgiving to other people and to show that mercy that we have already received. I want to be as merciful to other people as God has been merciful to me. Is this a bad thing? Could you imagine what the world would be like if the Christians were willing to do this? To be able to carry out the mercy that God has given us. The Pharisee needs forgiveness. That's a contradiction in some people's mind. It's their problem. If you go back to John 9, or actually go to John 7, we're going to John a couple of times. And again, just look at their mentality. Look at how they viewed themselves, and you almost feel sorry for them. But in John 7, in verse 45, when they went to go and try to have Jesus seized, it says in verse 45, finally the temple guards went back to the chief priests and the Pharisees, who asked them, why didn't you bring him in? No one ever spoke the way this man does, the guards declared. You mean he has deceived you also? The Pharisees retorted. Has any of the rulers or the Pharisees believed in him? No, but this mob that knows nothing of the law, there is a curse on them. Do we really think that the Jews knew nothing of the law? I'm just throwing that out there. Go on. Nicodemus, who had gone to Jesus earlier and who was one of their own number, asked, does our law condemn anyone without first hearing him to find out what he is doing? They replied, are you from Galilee too? Look into it, and you will find that a prophet does not come out of Galilee. What's not written there is because we say so. Jump over to 9 verse 34. It's one verse, but it's right before they chunked the blind man out of the synagogue. And there's a couple of interesting jabs here, but one of the things that the Pharisees say to them is, to this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? That phrase speaks volumes. Who are you to lecture us? Well, again, that's how they view themselves. Do we view ourselves the same way? Do we seek God's grace? Jesus says, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Do we seek God's grace? If we do, we must come humbly to accept it. Is it because God is egotistical? That's what some atheists believe. Oh, yes, God, come save us. We need saving. We're worthless without you, blah, 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 blah. God's just a big old ego. So self-centered. Can't do anything without him. Scared of being forgotten. Is that why God says this? Is this why Jesus said this? Is that the point of it? What is? Obviously, it's not that. So what is it? Why is it that we have to humble ourselves before we're exalted by God?
He's our creator.
What?
He's our creator.
Yeah, well, yes. Don't think about God so much. Think about pride and humility. Why do we have to humble ourselves before we're exalted?
If we don't, we still have ourselves too high in our own opinion. We just can't see him unless we quit looking at self.
That's right. That's how this works. A person who cannot get past seeing themselves cannot see the need to humbling oneself before God. This is one of the big reasons why they were hypocrites, because they tried this. Yes, we bow to God all the time. Let us tell you about it. But we ask God to help us. No, see, that's not the way it works. That's not the way humility works. And people are down on the Bible from various parts of the Bible that talk about humility and submission in various ways. But the truth is, that is the only way in which we can truly worship God is with humility and submission. And submission and humility only mean anything if it's in areas that we naturally don't want to humble ourselves in. You want to take me to Hawaii? Okay, I'll humble myself to your will, and I'll allow you to. All right, I'll do this. I know, yes. It's my cross to bear. That's not humility. It's not. Humility only means anything if it's in areas that we don't want to bow easily. Huh? That's right. Yeah. And so if we want God to exalt us, we first have to recognize the fact that we need God to exalt us, and we can't do that if we are the ones that are in the center of our lives. That's how come this works this way. It's not because God's egotistical. It's because we have to get out of the way. We cannot see the fact that we need grace until we humbly see ourselves as we really are, sinners. opportunity of grace. Now, there's another punchline to this, and that is in the next section, verses 15 through 17, with Jesus and the little children. Now, this isn't part, if your Bible's segmented into parts, you're going to say, well, that's not the same part, I know. But you look at what's going on with Jesus and the little children, and what is this about? It's about humility again. That's how come it follows. Jesus just gave them an illustration with a Pharisee and a tax collector. Now, he's going to spend the next period of time with some babies. How does that make you feel that Jesus was quite willing and able and would be quite content rolling around the floor with a bunch of babies? I see some smiles. That's what I'm looking for. I mean, yeah, exactly. He wasn't above that. He loved that. In verse 15, it says, people were also bringing babies to Jesus to have him touch them. When the disciples saw this, they rebuked them. Why did the disciples rebuke them?
I figured Jesus had bigger things to do.
Jesus, you don't have time for this kind of behavior. We got other things to do. You got sermons to preach. You got parables to say. You got miracles to produce and all this. You don't have time to deal with the babies. Children back in the day were better seen and not heard. I mean, they were very low on social standing. But yet, what example do we have here? The Son of God spending time with the babies. That right there speaks volumes. But Jesus says some stuff too. He says, but Jesus called the children to him and said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. Yeah. Don't get cranky because I'm dealing with babies. Do you think, can you see in your mind's eye, if you have a good imagination, can you see a Pharisee playing with some babies? Yeah. I don't know. They might get his flattery dirty.
I love with twins and they might get their tassels wet.
Now notice Jesus' answer though. Let them come to me and do not hinder them. Let them come, and Peter, James, and John, get out of the blessed way. Go fish. All right? I'm playing with the babies. Go somewhere. But then comes the scary part. For the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will not enter it. What does this mean?
Spending more time with children.
Why?
Because they have something to teach us.
Yes, they do.
Teaching a lesson of innocence as well. Not
Yes.
humility, but innocence.
Innocence, humility, trust, openness, complete love. What do kids do? Kids are awesome when they're first born. We teach them how to hate. We teach them how to be prejudiced. We teach them how to be violent. We teach them all this junk. If we left them alone or gave them the role models that they deserve, it would be a completely different world. But what is it about children? There's a picture that I have on my Facebook wall right now. I forget. Did I get it from you, Cynthia? I'm not sure. There's a picture. There's a statue of Jesus trying to carry a cross, right? And in the back of this picture, there's a little girl who saw, and again, it's a statue of a struggling Jesus trying to lift the cross, okay? So he's like on his hands and knees trying to pick it up. And then a little girl comes out away from her mama and she's trying to pick up the back. That's the nature of children right there. I mean, did I get that from you? No, okay.
That's good. I'll look for it.
Okay. I'll share it to the church wall tomorrow. But that's children. Now I know sometimes children are malicious little demons. I have 2 kids of my own. I'm not delusional. But when they come across somebody that they love, what kind of love is it? It is open. It is wholehearted. I have a friend of mine who, when him and his second wife got married, they're an older couple. She has a whole bunch of grandchildren and family. He really doesn't have tons of family, and There's just, yeah, exactly. He does now. And then one of her granddaughters came to me. He's kind of sitting in the corner, not really knowing what to do. One of the first family get-togethers they have. And she just comes to him and she has like a bowl of frosting because grandma's an awesome baker. She just started putting frosting all over his bald head and face. And he took it. And from that point on, I mean, that's how it is with kids. I know kids lie, kids do all, yeah, but how do they believe? How do they live? What's the imagination of a child? How do they love? How quick are they able to make friends? How quickly are they able to forgive? And all this. This is how Jesus says we're supposed to come to the kingdom of God. There's a whole bunch of Christians that need to relearn this lesson. Of course, I'm happy to be a Christian. I saw a cartoon once. It's an old man living like this, and he says, "Preacher, I said I need to smile more. You know how I hate trying these things." Yeah. But I mean, but that's really that. Come to church with me. It'll be the best thing you ever did. I'm really okay. I mean, but that's not like a childlike quality. Childlike qualities: trust, openness, pure love, absence of holier than thou art attitudes. That we just got done talking about. Jesus just gave us an example of the Pharisee. He said, don't do that. Gave us an example of the tax collector. He said, do that. Showed us the little kids, and he said, this is how you do it. So the final question is, how are we coming to God in prayer? And are we justified when we do so? I can't answer that. But what I can say is, it's based on how willing we are to be humble, to be honest, to be open, to be trusting, to be free in our life with God and other people. That's how we approach God like the tax collector. And that's also how we approach God like a child. I don't know how old any of us will ever get. Never think that you outgrow the need to be childlike before God. Though you could be young, actually. But that's how
childlike, not childish.
one can be the other.
They sound similar, but they're different.
Right. But if we do that, we're approaching God in the way that He wants us to. Anybody have any last questions or comments as we wrap up tonight? All righty. Well, if you're visiting with us, you are our honored guest, and we're so pleased that you have chosen to be here with us tonight. We're going to go over our prayer list, see if there's anything that we need to edit or add. What has the sign-up sheet by chance? There's a pin on it. Thank you. All right. Elizabeth Perkins asked us to remember Bobby Gallion, son-in-law of hers that was baptized this last weekend at Camp Bambino. Pray for his walk. Peggy asked us to thank God for his restored health. Javier and Delia asked us to thank God for all the blessings, praying for our country and government officials, and prayers for all the branches of the service and their families. David and Diana asked us to pray for Mark, Jennifer, and their family. And the old families, prayers for guidance, protection, and mercy in their lives. How are y'all doing? Good seeing you. Amy Ramirez, thankful Amy's doctor has found medicine that has been helping the past couple of days. Mark and Amy, she has a heart issue. Rick and Maya Martinez praying for guidance and to make a financial decision this week. And also pray, I don't know if we're praying for Sydney or praying for everybody else, but she's driving now. Not my Sydney, this is Sydney Martinez. I know, right? Although my Ethan has been driving around the parking lot, so, you know, does.
Anthony is great pastor.
Ethan, are you blushing?
Anthony is great pastor too.
You don't have to do that, Bill.
Sorry.
Gabe Garcia, prayers for my son's Gabe interview on Thursdays from Baldy and Ellie. I also wants to pray for Rachel, who's recovering, daughter's hurt eye. I also remember Jeff Sims, who's still in Legends Transitional Care in the gown for IV antibiotic treatment. I was going to go see him tomorrow. I asked Glenda, when's a good time to go? Because I don't want to go and go to therapy. She's like, anytime he's born. Apparently, he's not going to therapy. He's not doing much of anything. He's just kind of sitting there. You know, that's it. So that's one of they said, visitors welcome. And like he has nothing going on. So so he's in room 602, and he's in Legends Transitional Care. Is there anything we need to add or edit to this?
I'd like that too.
Yes.
One of my friends, his name's Moises.
His name's what?
His name's Moises.
Can you spell that?
And
Moses. Okay, thank you.
I, to the night.
It's an eye.
Where the E's supposed to go?
M-O-I.
M-O-I, thank you. Anyway, go ahead.
He has a pain in his jaw, and he's gone to several doctors. They can't find what's wrong with him. He shares the gospel around. He's gone to San Antonio. He's known as Christ Up, and he also raps in the gospel. Like earlier, he did a show in San Antonio in front of a bar, bringing people in, flowing God. And so he's asking for prayer that, they find what's causing his jaw, his pain. And so that way he can continue, he feels like he's trying to get, like they're trying to shut him up. Yeah.
Anybody else? Yes.
I'm just really thankful that my daughter Jessica and my son-in-law Cole are here. They're my children of faith, because I don't have blood children of my own. I mean, they have filled that hole in my life by God's grace, and I'm thankful that they were able to make the trip down from Lubbock, and I'm praying for them as he's going to school up at Sunset, and they're to become a preacher, and she's going to school to become a social worker, and I'm so proud of them both, and I just pray that God will all of them in this.
So you'll become a preacher? You sure about that?
I'm doing the mission.
It takes a what? Takes a sense of humor, but just a little bit. This whole joke is like an old man who's like an 80-year-old who's like, who's the ministry's dad? I'm 30 and I'm looking great. Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Well, again, it's great having everybody here, and we'll pray together, and we hope to see you all again soon. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wonderful day that you blessed us with, and we rejoice in your name. And we're so thankful that you have brought us here together, and we thank you for bringing the visitors, those we don't know as well right now, our way, and we pray that we may have the opportunity to get to know them better. We ask that you be with those who have asked for our prayers. We also ask you to be with Moses as they seek to find out what's going on with his jaw, and we're also thankful for Jessica and Cole and their family making it safe down. And we're so thankful for you and for everything that you've done for us, and we're so thankful that we're able to approach you as sinners, and that through your work and the work of your Son, that we're able to be free from sin that easily entangles us. And we're so thankful for the forgiveness that you offer, and we pray that we may be empowered to take this love and forgiveness out to the world around us. We ask that you be with us and bring us back together in Jesus' name. Amen.
How are you?
Hey, it's great seeing y'all.